Do you love books? Do you wish you could hear some insights straight from the author themselves? Join Sam Hankin, your host, as he interviews top-selling book authors and dives into interesting and unforgettable discussions here at the Avid Reader.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Avid Reader, brought to you by Wellington Square Bookshop. Our guest today is Eric Schwitzgebel, author of The Weirdness of the World. It was published by Princeton University Press earlier this year. Eric's blog since 2006 is The Splintered Mind, which is a lot of fun to read. He's also the author of A Theory of Jerks and Other Philosophical Misadventures. He's also the author of Perplexities of Consciousness and Proponent Meets Skeptic. Well, yes, the world is weird, but just how weird is it? Can our common sense buttress us against the bizarre, or are we stuck with J.B. Haldane's "The universe is not only queerer than we suppose, but queerer than we can suppose"? And that's one of the many epigraphs in the book, which are worth the pages right there. Or I'm thinking, as Donald Rumsfeld stated in one of his prescient and obfuscatory quotes, we also know that there are known unknowns. We also know that there are unknown unknowns, the ones we don't know we don't know. So, are we in a pocket universe in some quiet corner of the real one? Are we Sims? Are we Chalmers zombies? Are we entire universes unto ourselves, which is cool because chapter 6 is solipsism, which is my favorite because of my narcissistic self. In any event, whatever all this is, I mean, I wake up every morning and go, what the hell is this? But the thing that's cool about Eric, he doesn't put a theory out there that says this is the way it is. He just goes, it's going to be weird and bizarre. And he gives us a 99.9 to the 50th power that it will be the bizarre. Or sometimes he does. But, therefore I am. All the philosophers, in my opinion, that I've interviewed, and I'm not bragging, but here's who I've interviewed. Obviously, the Godhead, David Chalmers, Philip Goff, Andy Clark, John Parrington, Wolf Danielson, Chris Ferry, Brian Swim. The thing about it is that they're all different. Which one am I supposed to believe? Are any of them right, or are they all wrong, or what? In any event, like I said, they all seem to go back to Descartes, before the horse. But anyway, before I keep rambling, here's Eric to explain his way out of this quandary, or to tell us to just, read Borges or pull weeds and enjoy the moment. So, hey, Eric, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
So, not to put you on the spot, but because I read this on my iPad, I looked, and you've mentioned David Chalmers' name 82 times. So, and everybody does. And I go, what's the deal? I mean, he and I had a nice chat about Reality Plus, Douglas Hofstadter, Ultimate Frisbee, The Matrix, and zombies. Why is he like this, the godhead of all this stuff? And then, basically when he's telling me, all right, the hard problem of consciousness, I can kind of intuit that myself. And then when he talks about Reality Plus and virtual reality, I like Samuel Johnson, I refuted it thus: we have to poop. You can't get away from that. You can't be in virtual reality all the time. So what's the deal with David?
I'm a big Chalmers fan. I think if there is a philosopher of our generation who's remembered in 200 years, it's more likely to be David Chalmers than anybody else.
Because?
I would say, let's start with his first stuff on the hard problem of consciousness and zombies and property dualism. Right. So philosophy of mind from, say, the 60s through the 1990s in the Anglophone mainstream was really pretty much scientific materialism. Right. There's no immaterial soul. Idealism, the idea that the world is just ideas and there's no physical thing at all at the fundamental level, just seemed like bananas. Nobody was a panpsychist in the sense that they think, panpsychists think consciousness is everywhere, even in individual elementary particles, right? We're kind of all mainstream materialists mostly, except for maybe some Christians who believed in immaterial souls. But there had always been through this
2 billion of them, by the way.
yeah. But they're always been through this kind of consensus materialism, a variety of problems and objections and reasons to worry. And David Chalmers did a really good job of distilling and making rigorous and really capturing the reasons for nervousness about this mainstream materialist picture. And he is an incredibly clear writer and thinker. He's kind of an analytic philosopher's philosopher. And you can see exactly how his arguments go and how each step follows from the next and why each step is supported. And so you really can kind of, by getting into his work, really see the structure of these concerns that he articulates for mainstream materialist theories of the mind. And the field, after he introduced that, the field just exploded. Everyone had a different answer, right? People did not want to give up on materialism, right? But everyone had a different response. But Chalmers he had anticipated all of this stuff. His arguments, if you read like The Conscious Mind and you think, here's the flaw in the argument, right? Chalmers has already covered it. He's already got it papered over. And it's, as David Lewis actually mentioned, another great philosopher, mentioned in his blurb on the back of the original version of Chalmers' Mind, you can't really find a flaw in the argument. All you can do is disagree about where the weight of the considerations ultimately lie.
Well, if you go top down or bottom up, it starts with the hard problem starts with this feeling, presumably you and I both have right now, that accompanies the awareness of our sensory information. Why does that exist? Yeah. But my answer is because I'm just a guy, no one knows. None of this is disprovable. Right?
Well, so why would it matter if it's disprovable?
Yeah.
I mean, I think you know that you have experiences. You know that you're conscious.
No, I don't.
You don't know.
No, I kick a rock and I don't refute it thus. You were really good, because when I mention solipsism to any of these guys, they get mad at me because it screws up their whole theory. I did the same word check with David, and there wasn't solipsism one place in his book, and you had the guts to have a whole chapter on solipsism, and you didn't dismiss it out of hand.
Right.
And I honestly believe that there is a possibility, and again, you do possibilities down to the tiniest bit. There is a possibility that either you or I are here, but not both.
Yes. All right. Yeah. So I do acknowledge that possibility, and I explore it in the chapter on solipsism and the chapter on 1% skepticism. And I'm trying to articulate what's great about Chalmers without getting into all of that, because I'm a very different Chalmers. But I think I just, in terms of historical context for Chalmers, what I'm articulating is, I think, the consensus view and why he's historically important, because he upset the mainstream materialist orthodoxy in a way that was really rigorous and difficult to disprove. Right. And since Chalmers, there's been a proliferation of alternatives to the mainstream materialist worldview about the mind, including resurgences of idealism and different kinds of dualism and panpsychism, which he started taking seriously, and is now, and you interviewed Philip Goff, is now, an important position. In the 90s, panpsychism was there with solipsism. Is like, if your view ends up there, then something must have gone wrong, would be how most people would respond to it, right? So he was historic. He's also done wonderful work since then, but just thinking about his 1996 book was, I think, historically important to the progress in philosophy of mind, the critique of mainstream materialism, and the opening up of other alternatives. Those alternatives are some of the alternatives I explore in my book.
Yeah, and there was one point towards the end where you admire children when they ask the why behind the why behind the why. To me,
Yeah.
that's just as intelligent and smart and as well vocalized as any argument that you guys make.
Yeah, well, that's that is part of what I like about philosophy. I mean, to me, philosophy is wonderful in the sense that for any question, you can kind of try to peer beyond it to the root or to the behind you go behind the next curtain and behind the next curtain, try to figure out the why behind the why behind the why. And it doesn't take long before you get into really foundational stuff that we don't have good answers for.
Yeah, but what if you talk about it was really well written because I imagined it, even though I've thought about it lots of times. When you talk about a pocket universe, like we're in this little tiny corner in our little bubble, and
Right.
and maybe ants connect. Maybe they can kind of look up and maybe see us, but again, the chances are minuscule at best. So
Right.
if we're inside that, we can ponder, but again, the unknown unknown is always going to be an unknown unknown because we don't have the capacity and the qualities that would allow us to observe something that's within our ambit unobservable. So what's the point?
So here's something I thought that David Hume said, and it turned out that I kind of made it up out of something else that David Hume said.
That's good.
I thought that Hume said, and he said something kind of close to it, that we are like fleas on the back of a dog watching a hair grow and saying, ah, that's how the universe works.
Yeah. Remember when Feynman said, if aliens came and we were playing chess and we figured out every rule of chess and we thought we knew chess perfectly and we're so excited that we're so smart, and then someone castled, what the hell? We thought we had it.
Well, I mean, there's an AI version of this with Go, right?
Yeah. Oh
I mean,
God.
obviously there's AI chess too, but the kind of, in a way, the more startling one is with Go, where you know AlphaGo was able to beat the world champion Go player by making these moves that professional Go players found alien and hard to comprehend, and yet they, it won.
Yeah. Well,
So we think we understand Go, but it turns out that even this simple game, there are layers of depth beyond human comprehension.
well, one of my many challenges, disabilities, is that I can't look 2 to 3 to 4 moves ahead in chess. I just don't have the ability to do so. And the complexity of large language models or AIs is that they do have the ability to look so far ahead. And so something that might seem counterintuitive to even a skilled player, they've already mapped out. Yeah.
Can't just be that because of the combinatorial explosion, right? So if you took every possible move in chess or Go
Mm-hmm.
and then looked at every possible subsequent move and every possible subsequent move for just 5 or 6 moves, you end up with a combinatorial explosion that becomes very difficult for a computer to handle in real time. There
Really?
has to not only be a capacity for a depth of processing, but also the capacity to prune possibilities down to the ones that are worth evaluating and the ones that are not, or the capacity to recognize patterns other than just kind of brute figuring out, what all the combinations are.
Yeah. It's like sometimes a minor sacrifice, losing a battle to win a war, is also involved. I was reading a story about the pitcher Greg Maddux, and he was in a game where he was losing like 12-0, and the catcher said, pitch outside, pitch outside, pitch outside. And instead he pitched inside, and the guy hit it like 450 feet. And the catcher got really mad at him. He goes, he'll remember that pitch.
Yeah.
And then in the World Series, he never gave him that pitch, and the batter thought it was coming, and he struck him out. And
Yeah, that's a nice story.
yeah, it's like, well, then if you talk about consciousness, which is really a major part of yours and all your buddies' lives, and you go into, oh, well, and you say, you dismiss out of hand the possibility that an electron has any consciousness at all. The question is, does an oak tree radiate the essence of its oakness as a form of consciousness? I don't know. I've experienced it, but only in an altered state of consciousness. But if you work your way down from dogs or up to octopuses or dolphins, I'm pretty damn sure, and using your nomenclature, I'm 99.99% sure that a dolphin is aware of its own existence. Would you agree?
I'm inclined to think so. I don't have maybe quite the level of confidence that you do about it, but probably that would be definitely my inclination. I think that, when it comes to thinking about what kinds of entities are conscious, there's a huge range of views from the extremely liberal to the extremely conservative. And I'm kind of a little bit of a moderate liberal in my heart, but I don't know if that's right. I think there's a wide range of broadly plausible views. So we already talked about kind of the most radically liberal view of all, which is the panpsychism, the view that everything is conscious. And then, of course, dolphins are conscious. But to kind of invite you into the space of thinking about why we might be pretty conservative about what entities are conscious. There's a class of views that think in order for us to have experiences at all, our experiences always come with a kind of self-awareness component. If you're, say, looking at something red and you're having an experience of that redness, it seems like on these kinds of views, they emphasize this, right? You have a kind of self-awareness of the fact that you're seeing red while you're experiencing it. If that's true, then in order to have an experience, you have to have some kind of self-concept of yourself as an experiencer. If experience always comes with self-knowledge of the fact that you are experiencing the thing, then you got to be the kind of entity that's cognitively sophisticated to have self-knowledge of the fact that you have a mind.
Yeah, it seems
and humans have that, and dolphins, is a pretty good guess, would have that, right? And other kinds of social mammals and birds might have that, because social mammals and birds kind of need to keep track of other conspecifics and maybe keep track of their mental states. And that might be the kind of thing that leads you to have a self-awareness of yourself as an entity who has a mind. But you get much beyond that. Lizards, frogs, right? Can they really think of themselves as selves with mental states? Can a frog think, I am having a visual experience of a fly right now? Seems like a reach. So, right, if you can get yourself in that kind of mood about like what consciousness might involve, then that kind of thought supports being on the more conservative side of the view about what sorts of animals could have consciousness.
I just always get lost when you say seems. All you philosophers seems. I never understood that word, but be that as it may. You mentioned color.
I don't think seems was essential in my statement just then. I don't particularly like that word either in some context. So I don't want to lean hard on that.
Well, since you mentioned color, and to the listeners and readers of your book, which is sitting there on the front table at my bookstore, but talk about, there's something about Mary, thought experiment, because you discuss it briefly in the book, and it goes directly to color.
Yeah. Right. So this is a famous thought experiment developed by Frank Jackson. It figures prominently in Chalmers's critique of materialism, which we already discussed. Continues to be discussed at length. Torrent Alter just came out with a long book about it.
Really?
Exploring it in much detail. Yeah. So Mary is a genius color scientist who has spent her whole life in a black and white room, has never seen any colors other than black, white, and gray. Now we stipulate that she knows basically everything there is to know about how the brain works and how physics works and how light works, insofar as those things are describable through ordinary physics and physiology. The thought is she steps outside of the room and sees red for the first time. She learns something new, it seems like. She learns what it's like to experience red. That's the thought, right? So here it is as a kind of formal argument. In the room, Mary can learn every physical fact there is about red experience. When she steps out of the room, she learns a new fact, what it's like to see red. Ex hypothesi, in the room, she learned every relevant physical fact there is to know. So this new fact must not be a physical fact. If it were a physical fact, she could learn it in that room.
Well, the paradox
that's the nature of the argument, and then there have been various, of course, materialists have their responses, but that's the structure of the argument.
But the paradox is that she couldn't describe to you what red is once she saw it. There's no way. It's bright,
right.
It's colorful, it's like an apple, but she can't tell you what red is, and no one can.
Right. If she could, then say, Larry, who's still in his room, she could go over to Larry and, send him, a message and say, hey, Larry, this is what it's like to see red. It's like a trumpet. And Larry would go, oh, it's like a trumpet. Now I get it. Right. That doesn't seem to work. Right. So, yeah, it seems like it's something ineffable, something that's not describable in the ordinary language that someone can understand without actually having that experience. So that's an important part of this thought experiment, because if it were describable in some kind of neutral language that was accessible to people who had never had color experiences, maybe people who are born colorblind or people who are entirely congenitally blind, right? If it were fully describable and comprehensible by them, then presumably Mary could have learned about it in that room before she stepped outside.
Take your legal pad, draw a line down, vertical line down the middle. What's ineffable in human experience and what's not ineffable?
You might think experience itself, right? This would be a generalization of the kind of thing you're saying about Mary, right? That experience itself is ineffable, right? That any kind of, if you take it one category of sensory experience at a time, right? Could you ever describe to a blind person what it's like to see? Right? We try things like we say red is like a trumpet, but it's pretty plausible that that's not adequate, that a blind person will really not really understand what it's like to see red from descriptions like that. Okay, well, how about auditory experiences to a person who's congenitively completely deaf, right? It seems like you have the same problem. So it could be that for every category of experience, you need to have experiences in that category in order to have an understanding of those experiences.
Synesthesia is a perfect example of that. But in order to experience synesthesia, you have to have the ability to experience all five senses. So that fails there, I guess.
Yeah, maybe.
But I had it. I mean, Monday's green, Tuesday's brown, Wednesday's dark green, Thursday's brown, Friday's orange, Saturday's yellow, and Sunday's white, and has been since I was 3 years old. Oh, and Chalmers has it too. We talked about that.
Oh, I didn't realize that. No,
yeah, we had a good time. One of the other things you do is you make cogent arguments that seem absurd at first, and then you have the reader believing them, and then you pop the balloon, especially in your chapter in which you posit that the United States itself has consciousness.
Yeah.
So talk about why you try to convince us and then say why that actually isn't the way things are.
Well, I think it might be the way things are.
Okay.
So my aim in that chapter is let's back up a little bit to where you started in your intro. Right? My view in this book is that every theory about consciousness and the fundamental structure of the universe is bizarre and dubious. There are no kind of common sense theories left. And furthermore, we don't have the epistemic tools. This is what I mean by saying they're dubious. We don't have the epistemic tools to really confidently believe in one theory as opposed to some of its competitors. So one of the things that I want to do in defending this view is illustrate some of the bizarre implications that follow from, or at least appear to follow from, materialism, scientific mainstream materialism, which is the most widely accepted view in the current philosophical community. And one of those bizarre implications, I think, is that the United States, considered as a concrete entity with people as its parts, kind of like you are a concrete entity with cells as your parts, literally has experiences over and above the experiences of the people of whom it is composed. Right. So there is on this, I think if mainstream materialist views are correct, then it probably follows that, yes, the United States literally has a stream of conscious experience. There's a group level of experience. I take it most people will find this bizarre and implausible. But the structure of the argument is to look at the kinds of things that mainstream materialists say about why human beings are conscious, and then just notice that basically all of those things apply to the United States too.
Yes, you make a good
So
argument.
why are we conscious, right? It's got something to do with our brains. Well, what's so special about our brains? Well, they organize massive amounts of information. They guide intelligent responsiveness to the environment. Those are kind of two of the most obvious things about them. The United States, too, has massive amounts of information going around through it. And the United States also reacts to its environment, right? It defends its borders. It sends its armies out into other countries. It monitors space for asteroids that might threaten Earth.
Mhm.
It imports bananas. It does all these kinds of things, right? So, well, you say, well, okay, people have self-representations. They can understand their own states, right? Well, the United States has self-representations too, right? It represents the number of people in its population. It reports who just won the presidential election. It represents its position on nuclear disarmament to Iran. It does all kinds of things that seem to involve representing its own states. So what I aim to do in the chapter is kind of go one by one through the kinds of things that materialists tend to say are distinctive about brains, show that the kinds of things that the United States generally has those kinds of things too, address objections like say, oh, well, here's the crucial difference. And then, what I try to do is say, well, why would you think that should be a crucial difference? If you do think that's a crucial difference, then you're committed to other bizarre implications. Like you might think, for example, the United States reacts more slowly than an organism. The information travels more slowly around the United States than it does within a brain, right? So you say, that's the crucial difference. Right? But then you're committed to saying, well, consciousness requires that organisms be fast. So you could never, for example, encounter an alien that was slow paced. But that seems like, why would you accept that? That doesn't seem very plausible. It doesn't fit with most materialist views about what's important about consciousness. So it seems like if you reach for that, it's just because you're reaching for some excuse rather than that it's a principled, justified defense. And how do we know, anyway, that the United States is not conscious? I mean, why would we be so sure that that's not the case?
Yeah.
What is our epistemic status with regard to knowing what kinds of things are and are not conscious? Why would we think we have expert knowledge about that kind of stuff?
Today's a good day to discuss it because exactly what's happening today with Israel and Iran, which you mentioned, but it's, you know what? It's executive functioning. We just as we have an executive guide in the chair pulling the levers, today's consciousness was not essentially, it was totally executive function. Because you and I had no participation in that. We're just a little silly.
Right. I mean, like in the human organism, there are some activities that are kind of executive function top down, and there are others that arise bottom up.
Yeah. The preparation, the creation of the materials we'll be sending to Israel and the men who sit in the planes that go there and the carriers. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. But there is an element that there's an emotional element. So yesterday, a heron came and took one of the koi out of my fish pond, my favorite koi. He's a beautiful golden color. And as herons do, he picked him up and threw him onto the sidewalk because either he's a mean jackass or because it was too slippery or too heavy for him to hold. And I can form whatever opinion. But at the same time, I thought about it and I had a very personal grief. But then you have children in the Sudan, children in Palestine, you have children in the Ukraine, and I feel for them too, but it's not the same. And if it was the same, we wouldn't be able to function on a day-to-day basis because we'd be full of this horrible pain. And I wonder about that too. We have these day-to-day experiences that we attach a great deal of emotion and meaning to, but nobody else does.
Yeah.
I don't know. That seems to belie. As I talk to you guys, my brain begins to hurt because things start spinning around in it, which I guess is good. And
that's what I want. Yes.
Exactly.
Good pain. It's the same good pain you get from, pushing yourself hard athletically. It's just a cognitive version of that.
Yeah. But it's like the best thing about all your books is you start out by talking about a jerk or weirdness or bizarreness, and it insulates you at the outset from being wrong, which I think is a really good way to proceed because everyone else believes they're right. And you got Philip Goff and David Chalmers, and I'm in the middle saying, let's see. And the other thing is they're always talking about Men in Black or The Matrix or The Truman Show or Vanilla Sky or Total Recall. And I'm thinking, well, if they're talking about that, don't those movies just say exactly what you guys are saying too? Like the end of Men in Black when they open the locker and it turns out, or the little kid is playing marbles and one's a galaxy. Isn't that pretty much what you guys do?
Well, science fiction is a really interesting way of exploring philosophical ideas. So I think that philosophers and science fiction authors can be kind of partners in this project. And, in fact, I edit science fiction and write science fiction stories myself. So,
really?
But I think expository philosophy brings a different kind of rigor to it, right? When you get the 300-page book by Chalmers or Goff or whoever, you get a lot more of a certain type of detail than you get when you watch The Matrix.
Yeah, but there I don't have to make a choice. I read both of those books, and if I'm an intelligent lay reader, I suppose I'm supposed to make a choice at the end of who I believe and who I think is most likely right. Which is another.
As you said, this is where I cheat, basically.
Yeah.
I get to, since I'm a skeptic of a certain sort, right? I get to say, I don't know who's right among these various views. My view is that we don't know where the truth lies. And so while Chalmers and Goff and everybody else has to kind of defend their own particular take on these issues, I get what you might think is a somewhat easier, but maybe less satisfying task of saying why we shouldn't believe any particular take on it.
Which is very pleasant in an unusual and bizarre way. The other thing is that when your wife and kids are at temple and you're laying on your lounge chair and it's a question of pulling weeds or reading Borges, if I'm going to read Babel or pull weeds, I'm going to read Babel until the weeds are like 6 feet tall. Talk about that and talk about the tree that you build of probability.
Yeah.
The risk benefit analysis you do.
Right. So
You can start from the beginning, what I just said.
right. So one of the things that I argue for in the book is a position I call 1% skepticism. So the idea here is we should have a pretty high degree of belief or credence or confidence that the world is more or less how we think it is. Now, set aside issues of fundamental metaphysics, like the right interpretation of quantum mechanics or whether panpsychism is true or something like that. But I just mean things like, my car is parked in the parking lot and I've been living here in the United States and I'm age 56 and stuff like that, right? Those kinds of things, which are true regardless of what interpretation of quantum mechanics you accept or what theory of consciousness you have, right? Take those ordinary common sense things, right? Most skeptics historically have said, look, we don't know what's true. And they kind of like toss up their hands about it, say, we just don't have knowledge. And then dogmatists say, well, we do know. Of course, your car is in the parking lot. But what I want to kind of emphasize in that chapter is a different kind of position, which says, hey, why don't we give, say, a 99% confidence to my car is in the parking lot and allow us a small degree of doubt about those ordinary suppositions. Maybe, as you said, we're in the matrix and it's about to be shut down. Or maybe, as you mentioned earlier, all I am is a brain in a vat and there's no universe beyond the vat. Or maybe we're playthings in the hands of God and he's not very satisfied with us and he's about to put an end to things. Or there are various ways in which you could be radically skeptical, and I explore a bunch of them in the book. So kind of the thought I was having there that you're articulating when I'm sitting in my backyard, right, was I was on the fence rationally between reading Borges and weeding. I mean, sometimes I choose to do yard work rather than read a pleasant book, right? It's not always letting the weeds grow 6 feet tall. So I'm sitting there kind of not sure which I want to do. And then I think about, okay, well, there's a 1% chance, if I'm a 1% skeptic, that I'm dreaming right now, or that the world will suddenly come to an end, or something like that. A small chance. But if I was indifferent exactly on in the balance between weeding and Borges, then maybe I should choose the short-term pleasure over the long-term benefit. The short-term pleasure of reading Borges over the long-term benefit of weeding, because, hey, if it's a dream, what's the point of weeding? Right? If the universe is about to come to an end because it's a simulation that God's going to shut down, right? What's the point of weeding? So I think 1% skepticism is actually kind of an intrinsically interesting position to have in the skeptical space, a kind of between kind of dogmatic confidence and the kind of shrug your shoulders, we don't know anything view. I think that's an interesting philosophical space to be in that opens up a certain kind of doubt and wonder that's intrinsically valuable, actually. But I think another consequence of it can be that it weighs very slightly in the balance towards short-term goods over long-term goods.
Well, another way you approach it is with your airplane situation, where you talk about descending through turbulence and clouds, and you're actually having this experience at JFK, or you said it. And so you're coming down, your skepticism begins to fluctuate, and you start thinking about the sim, you start thinking about the percentages of, and I had a bone to pick with it because there are 150 passengers on the plane, and they're each experiencing it and also calculating the same odds you're calculating.
Right. But the odds are not independent of each other. They're all all those odds correlate. If one goes down, all of us are going down. But that thought experiment is a way of, to some extent, challenging myself or undercutting myself. right? So it's, to me, it's kind of fun and amusing to think, okay, let me give a 1% credence to the fact that I'm dreaming right now, or that the world is a simulation that's going to come to an end any minute. But then, as I'm descending into New York City in fog and turbulence, and I'm a little worried about crashing, I'm thinking, I'm really worried about the fact that my life might come to an end in the next several minutes. Now, the odds are probably 1 in a million or less. But I was just saying, sitting there kind of comfortably in my backyard saying, well, the world could come to an end. The odds maybe are 1 in 1,000, 99.9% it won't, but 0.1% it will. And there I was relaxed and happy. So do I really do I really think, was I really thinking in my backyard that I might really die or cease to exist at any moment? Because when there's a 1 in a million chance, or when I think there might be a 1 in a million chance, I get pretty worried. And I wasn't feeling worried in my backyard. So, kind of, is this all just kind of a game, or do I really believe it?
Well, your body had a visceral response to your fear in the plane.
Exactly. And I'm not going through life like hanging onto my seat saying, man, this could be a simulation. I mean, it's a small chance, but if it is, we're probably doomed. I don't have that visceral reaction. So what's going on there? Do I actually kind of believe the skeptical propositions that I put forward?
Well, if you switch, say you switch to like the Copenhagen school, and I take a book here, and I assume that unless the wave function collapses, or until there are no words in this book right now, they don't exist. The moment they exist is when I open the book and see them. Just like Einstein was saying, you're telling me that when I look away, the moon.
That's one way of reading the Copenhagen interpretation. Quantum mechanics, the interpretation of quantum mechanics is, highly contentious, of course.
But you give me your butt, because you always give a butt in the book, so to speak.
Well, I mean, another option here would be the many worlds view.
Yes.
Right, which says that basically every possible configuration is being manifested all the time, and that if it were the case, and it might not be the case that the letters in the book are contingent upon quantum mechanical phenomena, but if it were the case that there was some quantum mechanical phenomena, say like a uranium atom decay, that determined whether the book had a happy ending versus a sad ending, that'd be so cool if that were the case. Then on the many worlds view, what would happen is the world has already split into two worlds, one with a happy ending and one with a sad ending, and you just don't know which world you're in until you open that book.
Yeah.
Whereas in the view that you were articulating, which is one way of thinking about the Copenhagen interpretation, right? The world is kind of in a superposition, an in-between state, an indeterminate state between those two possibilities until you open the book and it kind of resolves or collapses into one of the two.
Yeah, you even talk about the anthropic principle too. I mean, yeah, if ice didn't float, we wouldn't be here. I mean, why the hell does ice float? Should sink.
Right. So according to the anthropic principle, we shouldn't be surprised to find ourselves in a portion of the universe that is highly hospitable to the existence of observers. Because if it wasn't hospitable to the existence of observers, we wouldn't be here. Right? So you might look around the universe and say, wow, man, Earth is such a special place. How lucky we are to be here, right? But of course, it's not luck at all. And the anthropic principle is a way of kind of formalizing that idea and trying to give it a little bit of a rigorous basis and think of how it might generalize to other cosmological and self-location principles.
Yeah, but you lay it out there. You talk about gravity. You talk about if it was just pinched a little bit. And again, that's what's good about the book, is that you're just laying it out there. You're not, well, and go back to Babel, which is kind of ironic, I guess. But in the library, would there be a book that contains all of the books, including itself? You know, set theory, it's like Principia Mathematica and Kurt Gödel getting all, getting Bertrand Russell all upset. But I mean, yeah, I mean, my brain is hurting again. I don't even know what I'm saying. But all I know is it made me think of it. So yes, I thought of Babel. I thought of the books that contain all books, including themselves. Why did I think that? I have no idea. Why did I think that?
Yeah, well,
Because I'm conscious.
one of my science fiction stories is called The Turing Machines of Babel. So this is a play on Borges' Library of Babel, right? So in the Library of Babel by Borges, right, this is a story in which the universe is this vast library, and it contains every possible book consisting of a random combination of, I don't know, what is 26 different possible characters.
A period.
Right. So basically, you've got this base, almost every book in this universe is just meaningless nonsense. But also, every possible book of up to however many pages it is and however many characters it is will be somewhere there in Borges's vast library. Right. So that's the kind of setting of Borges's Library of Babel. And, I think that's an awesome, mind-blowing thing to think about. But yeah, since you brought it up, I also have a story called The Turing Machines of Babel, which changes the books of Borges's library into computer programs. Right. So the kind of classic idea of the Turing machine is that you could take any computer program and represent it as a kind of a long string of characters on infinitely long tape. Of course, no program is going to be infinitely long, but there'd be no limit to the length of the tape, right? So you could create a Borges-like universe in which these books are actually instructions for computer programs. And then what you have is a universe that contains every possible computer program. And if you accept computationalism about the mind, which is one of the main views in current mainstream scientific philosophy, psychology, neuroscience, then that universe will contain every possible mind in every possible mental state, including the mental state of thinking that you're reading a story about every possible mental state being instantiated in a universe of this sort.
Which is kind of like being in hell.
Yeah, so this story, Turing Machine, I don't want to go on too much about it, but yeah, this story is kind of like meta Borges himself, right?
That's pretty good. It's meta, which once again makes it very difficult for me to think. But
yeah, I mean, what I want to do, I mean, the project in the book overall, right, and what you kind of talked about with the childlike wonder and the why behind the why is, I think we are so accustomed to looking kind of nearsightedly at the familiar aspects of the world around us and not trying to peer behind the veil, that there's something really valuable in just opening your mind to wild possibilities that might be true, even if we can't establish that they definitely are true. Maybe it's true the United States is conscious. I take that seriously. I don't think I've established that it's true. I think it's probably not true, and there are various ways you could weasel out of it. But just thinking about that as a possibility, or the possibility maybe you're dreaming right now. I mean, dreams, a lot of dream researchers think dreams can be really realistic. You could have during sleep, you could have experiences that are basically identical to the types of experiences you have while you're waking. Not every dream theorist think this, but a lot of dream theorists and ordinary people think this. How do you know right now, you as a listener or viewer, how do you know that this isn't one of those dream experiences? Can you be 100% certain?
No.
I think you can be You probably feel pretty certain that you're not dreaming right now, but like 100%. So I think there's just kind of thinking about possibilities that you don't ordinarily take, that you ordinarily assume are false. Just thinking about that already constitutes a kind of broadening of your sense of wonder and your sense of what the universe might contain. Uh, that's, I don't know, both to me exciting and gratifying um, intrinsically, and also I think is instrumentally a useful exercise in kind of knocking you out of your usual dogmatic assumptions about things.
Yeah, and as we conclude, I would say that that would be to me the closest thing to proof of our awareness of being here is that at 72 years old, I actually do wake up, or many times during the day, think, what is this? What am I in? And that goes to your bizarre, to the weird. I know that whatever it is I'm in is something I don't know what it is I'm in. And that whatever the explanation is, while I may not ever obtain it, or maybe after I die, I'll obtain it, but whatever that sense of wonder is the closest I can come to proving that I'm actually here.
Yeah, I think it's one of the most amazing things about planet Earth is that here we are, kind of bags of mostly water, and we can wonder about the fundamental structure of the universe and whether something happened before the Big Bang and whether God exists and whether we're in a simulation and what the fundamental nature of value is. It's you know, kind of amazing that basically stardust can aggregate in such a manner that it's capable of asking these questions and having these thoughts, even if we can't figure out the answers. Just the very process of thinking about them is already something that makes Earth different from any other planet we know of, and even a planet that had life but didn't have life like ours.
The other thing is laughter, because you wrote a book that you have time in it to laugh. And I think that's another singular experience that gives rise to the idea that, yeah, maybe I really am here because I'm laughing. And you know what I laughed? I laughed because the way you started the book with the idea of we're basically bags of water, because I always think it was a good way to start it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I hope that my book provokes a certain amount of laughter.
Yeah, I mean, I think that as a bookseller, I think that if you create a book where the pages make you smile or laugh, you have to turn the page. You can't stop reading. And I think that's an excellent way to sell your book. And it's an excellent way to do what I said at the beginning. The reason I own a bookstore is to make people happy and to make them laugh. And that's another argument for consciousness, I think, although I can't articulate why.
Laughter is one of those miracles that's hard to explain. There are all these theories about comedy and humor and laughter that are so boring and seem so misplaced. It seems like no one's really figured out
Yeah,
laughter yet.
no one's gonna laugh reading them. That's
Sadly.
yes,
The most depressing, boring books about comedy.
I know.
Yeah.
The people who write them don't have a sense of humor. Well, like Mary, they're like Mary. They know everything about laughter and humor. They just don't have it.
Somehow it usually, I won't say always, fails to manifest well in their books about it. I'm sure all these people have good senses of humor. I mean, Dan Dennett is one of them, and he had a good sense of humor, and he worked on a book on humor. But
So did Roger Penrose too.
yeah, it's like great thinkers throw themselves against humor. You'd think humor would be simple and easy, but it turns out that it's just this incredibly complex thing, and great thinkers throw themselves against it and struggle.
But the thing about David is that one, well, first of all, he's cool, and he still has great hair, unlike this, and he laughs a lot, and we had a good time just chatting. And then you realize, oh, this is fun. That's another thing: fun, laughter,
Philosophy
wonder.
ought to be fun.
Yeah,
I mean, not all philosophy has to be fun. Some of it can be terrible.
yeah. I'm not going to read.
But I prefer the fun stuff. I think that if if you're having fun, actually, it's a sign. Well, if you have fun when you're doing academic stuff, it's a sign that you're learning, that you're onto something, that there's something in it that's resonating with you that you're building on, right? As opposed to if you're feeling bored. You're feeling bored is a way of your mind telling you, I'm not learning anything valuable here. Let's move on to something else.
My father says, do whatever you want, but don't be a shoe salesman and don't be a toll booth collector. Anyway, all right. Well, like I said, we could go on forever, but this was really, really fun. The book is sitting there, and hopefully, do you publish your science fiction stories?
Oh yeah.
I didn't know that. I'll have to get those too. Well, anyway, thank you so much, Eric. This was a lot of fun, and I can't say I've learned the conclusion, the reasoning behind everything, but your book doesn't either. But as we said, it's incredibly entertaining and incredibly informational. I learned so much reading it. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for the fun chat.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of The Avid Reader. If you liked today's episode, check out more of our content on our channel.